One chance call can change everything. She's an ordinary girl having a terrible day. He's a man from another world, where destinies are decided. Her cry for help and cold soup fell on deaf ears. But for him, it became a call to action. Now their lives are inextricably linked. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. You've been laid off! The phrase sounded like a death sentence, without emotion, without any option for appeal. 20 minutes later, April was silently packing her things into a cardboard box, under the sympathetic and curious gazes of her colleagues. Another blow awaited her outside, a biting, cold downpour. The rain lashed her face, soaking her only good blouse as she cursed everything under the sun and tried to hail a taxi. At home, she tossed the damp box into the corner, stripped off her soaking wet clothes, and plopped down on the sofa. Cook? No way! She struggled to find her phone in the pile of things and ordered the first thing she saw on the app: spicy tom yum soup. A fire to somehow warm herself and burn away the resentment. She ordered food, hoping that at least it would brighten this terrible day. But minutes passed, and the app tracker showed that the courier was hopelessly stuck in traffic. At first, April was simply angry about the delay, but with each passing minute, her anger grew into something more. When the doorbell finally rang, she no longer ran, but approached slowly. Opening it, she saw a sullen man in a soaking wet jacket. He didn't apologize or say hello. Silently, he thrust the dripping bag into her hands and immediately handed her his phone to confirm her order. His fingers were clammy, and his gaze was empty and tired. April silently pressed the button, and he just as silently turned and walked away, leaving a wet, muddy trail on her hallway floor. She looked at the puddle with disgust, but managed to walk past it. She carried the bag to the kitchen, but her hopes for a comforting dinner were fading with each passing second. As she pulled out the container, she felt it was barely warm, and when she opened it, the final humiliation awaited her. The food inside was cold and repulsive. The soup had spilled, the noodles had clumps together, and the vegetable pieces were hopelessly jumbled, as if they'd been bumped along the road. It wasn't an appetizing dish, but a cold, unappetizing mess. She swirled her spoon around in the bowl, examining the bits of tofu and mushrooms floating in the murky broth. And then she saw it. A long, straight black hair. It wasn't just lying on top, it seemed woven into the very structure of the dish, coiling around the mushroom and the noodle like a snake. It was disgusting and graphic. It created the eerie feeling that the hair had always been there, from the very beginning of the preparation, an integral part of her order. April's head went blank. Then a low, muffled groan shattered the silence. She threw the spoon so hard it clanged against the wall, leaving an orange mark on the wallpaper. This wasn't just a hair in her food anymore. It was the universe's final, humiliating slap in her face. A sign that her day wasn't just bad, it was openly mocking her. Cold food, a rude delivery guy, a filthy hallway, and now this. Something in her chest snapped. The cold rage that had been building all evening boiled over. She was no longer just a frustrated woman. She was rage personified. Grabbing the phone, she jabbed at the screen so hard it almost cracked. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She found the delivery service number and dialed it, pressing the phone to her ear so hard her temples ached. She was ready to cause such a scene that indifferent delivery guy and his entire damn restaurant would be deaf for a long time. She would make them rue the day they decided to ruin April Jackson's lunch. The girl grabbed the phone, her fingers jabbing at the number so hard the screen nearly cracked. She didn't even check the number. Her vision was clouded with rage. Beeps. 1, 2, 3. Her patience snapped, and without waiting for an answer, she began shouting into the phone. Are you kidding me? I waited for my order 40 minutes. 40! Your courier arrived sullen, didn't even apologize, threw the bag down, and left. The food was cold, tasted like it came from the trash. And then I found a hair in the soup. A long black hair. She was almost out of breath, but she continued, her voice shaking with rage. Give me back my money, now, or I'll shut down your company. Do you hear me? I'll destroy you. There was only silence on the line. No apology, no answer. April threw the phone on the couch with a sob and burst into tears, all her anger dissolving into helpless tears. April had every right to be angry. Her fury was justified, and her grievances were well-founded. Anyone in her position would have spoken their mind. But if she'd known that because of one misplaced number, her cries for cold soup and hair would be heard not by the manager, but by the boss of the Korean mafia, she might have been a little more careful when dialing. At that very moment, perfect silence reigned in his office, broken only by Kim Min-ho's even, low voice. He was discussing matters that affected lives and fortunes with his men. No one dared interrupt, and suddenly his phone rang. Not his work phone, but that very one. The one he kept in a separate pocket and never used for idle chatter. A number known only to a few. If it was ringing, it meant something of the utmost importance, something he couldn't ignore under any circumstances. Minho raised his hand, cutting off the report mid-sentence. Everyone in the office froze. He slowly raised the phone to his ear, bracing himself for news of a failed operation or betrayal at the highest levels. But instead, a worried, tearful female voice came on the line, screaming about cold food, a rude delivery man, and someone's hair in the soup. For Kim Min-ho, there was one unshakable truth. If someone came to him with a problem, he would solve it. It didn't matter if it was a business threat or a matter of personal safety. It didn't matter even if the problem came to him completely by accident. He couldn't and wouldn't ignore it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't say, "You've reached the wrong number." He simply let her speak, absorbing every detail of her despair the way he receives intelligence. He analyzed her emotions, assessed the scale of the disaster in her life, and then made a decision. When her voice trailed off and the short beeps that signaled she had hung up, he slowly lowered the phone. Then he looked up at his frozen subordinates. "I have a new target," he said in a flat, no-nonsense tone. "Find a girl named April. She just ordered Tom Yum from the Golden Dragon." No one asked any unnecessary questions. The nods were brief and clear. That was enough. "That's all for today." Minho pushed back his chair. "You have assignments." The meeting was over. His men silently left, leaving the boss in his office with a new, unexpected task that now became a priority. "So what? She had the right," she whispered stubbornly to herself, but her voice no longer held the same confidence. Now, a burning awkwardness mingled with her anger. She'd laid it all out, all her grievances, to some random person on the other end of the line. And he simply remained silent. That silence was worse than any excuse. With a feeling of deep disgust, she walked over to the trash can, picked up the ill-fated bag with the container, tied it tightly, and threw it into the can with all her might, as if she wanted to bury the whole day with it. Then she went to the bathroom. She turned on the hot water, almost scalding, and began to tear off her clothes, feeling the fabric absorb all the horror. Steam filled the room, and she stood under the almost boiling streams, closing her eyes, letting the water wash away the sticky sweat of stress and the invisible traces of humiliation from her skin. She washed her hair, rubbing the lather into her scalp with such vigor, as if trying to wash away the memory of today. Wrapped in a soft, warm robe, she felt a little more human, a little more protected. But as soon as she lay down in bed and turned off the light, the thoughts came flooding back. In the darkness, she replayed the day like a broken disc. The cold face of the HR manager, the wet road home, the tired, angry face of the courier, and the long, ominous silence on the phone. What if I yelled at some pensioner, or at a loser like me, flashed through her mind. She felt ashamed of her lack of self-control, of this outburst. She pulled the covers over her head, trying to hide from herself. She had lost today, lost to work, lost to circumstances, and ultimately lost control of herself. The only thing left for her now was to try to sleep and hope that tomorrow would be a little better. The morning was rough. April barely slept. Yesterday kept playing over and over in her head. She sat down at the computer to look up work, but she couldn't concentrate. Her hands were shaking. Her thoughts were jumbled. She looked at the screen but saw no job postings. She remembered yelling into the phone. She felt so ashamed. Who did I yell at? She thought. Maybe it's someone else who was having a bad day? The apartment was quiet and stuffy. Dust hung in the air, and the ticking of the clock was irritating. She felt trapped in her failed life. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Not a regular knock, but a firm, confident knock. The kind of knocking that comes from someone who isn't used to waiting. April shuddered. Her heart started beating faster and faster. Who could it be? She slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A stranger stood in the doorway, a tall man in a perfect dark coat. It fit him as if it had been tailored especially for him. In his hands, he held a bag from the very restaurant where she had ordered from yesterday. But what struck her most was his face. It was calm and serious. His dark eyes stared straight at the door, as if he knew there was someone behind it. There was no malice in his gaze, but there was no kindness either. Just attention. April froze. She knew she looked terrible, her hair disheveled, her robe rumpled, her eyes red from crying. Her hand instinctively reached for the lock. Her fingers trembled as she opened the door. She opened it just a little, as if the gap could protect her. April stood silently, holding the bag, unsure of what to say. The stranger, Kim Min-ho, looked at her with a calm, searching gaze. "You probably don't understand why I'm here," he began, his voice even and confident. "Yesterday you called my number, the one you only call in the most important situations. Usually they talk about serious things there. Business, money, life and death. And you were screaming about cold soup and a hair in your food." He paused briefly, letting her take his words in. "I have a simple rule in life. If a problem reaches me, I solve it. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. It doesn't matter if it's mine or someone else's. You told me about your problem, so now it's my problem." Mino pointed to the bag in her hands. "I brought you fresh food because I heard how hungry and upset you were. But this is just the beginning. You said you wanted your money back and punish those who ruined your dinner. So let's do this right." He looked at her carefully. "I didn't just bring you food. I've already dealt with that restaurant. But if you want to see how problems are actually solved, come with me, right now. You can see for yourself that your complaints have been heard." April looked at him, trying to understand. This man spoke as if solving any problem was the most ordinary thing in his life. She began. "You don't need to decide now," he stopped her. "Eat first. A hungry woman isn't the best advisor. Then tell me if you're ready to see how words turn into actions." He moved toward the window, giving her space, but his posture and confidence filled the room. April knew this was a man who didn't just talk, he walked the walk. April stood in the doorway, clutching a warm bag of food. Disturbing thoughts raced through her mind. This man, Kim Min-ho, looked and spoke as if he were from another world. His calm confidence frightened her. Why did he even come, she thought. An ordinary person would have simply hung up and forgotten. But this one not only remembered, but also found my address. She glanced at his impeccable suit, then at her worn dressing gown. A gulf lay between their worlds. "I'm sorry about the call yesterday," she finally managed to say. "I wasn't myself. I got the wrong number. You shouldn't have worried." Mino listened silently, his face expressionless. This imperturbability made April even more nervous. "You see, these are my problems," she continued, feeling herself blush. "I'll handle it myself. I shouldn't have dragged you into this." She was afraid to say the next thing, but she felt she had to. "I can't thank you enough. I was fired yesterday. I have no money, no work." Her voice wavered. "I don't want to be indebted to anyone, especially now when I have nothing to pay with." April looked at the bag in her hands. The smell of food reminded her of yesterday's humiliation, but now it was joined by fear of unexpected help. "Let's just forget this incident," she whispered. "You go, I'll stay, and we'll never see each other again. It'll be better for everyone." She tried to return the bag, but Minho didn't take it. His arms remained relaxed at his sides. "Eat," he said simply. "You're hungry." His words sounded not like an order, but a statement of fact. There was neither pity nor condescension in them. "You don't owe anything," he continued. "Sometimes mistakes lead to the right decisions." April looked at him, trying to understand. This man was challenging her entire understanding of how the world worked. Nothing in her life had ever been free. Everything had to be paid for, fought for, sacrificed. But why? She couldn't help herself. "Why are you helping a stranger?" Minho tilted his head slightly, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. "Because I can," he replied, "and because I must. It's my choice." He paused, letting her take his words in. "Eat first," he repeated. "Hunger is keeping me from thinking. Then we'll decide what to do next." April slowly lowered her hand holding the bag. She knew this man wouldn't back down so easily, and for the first time in a long time, she felt not only fear, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe there really are moments in life when help comes without strings attached. Maybe sometimes it's worth simply accepting it. April silently finished her tom yum. This time, it was hot, fragrant, and perfect. Under its spicy warmth, the trembling in her hands gradually subsided and her thoughts cleared. She changed into clean clothes, brushed the tears from her cheeks, and taking a deep breath, walked out into the hallway where Minho was waiting. He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply nodded toward the dark sedan parked right outside the entrance. It was an expensive car, but unremarkable, like everything else around it. When he opened the door for her, she paused for a moment, still hesitant. "Sit down!" His voice sounded less like an order than like a statement of the inevitable. "If I've started helping, I'll see it through. And you'll be satisfied, you can be sure of that." Something in his tone made her obey. She slid into the leather seat, and he walked around the car and settled behind the wheel. The interior smelled of leather and some cold, expensive perfume. His scent. As they drove, April glanced at him furtively. He drove as calmly and confidently as he spoke. His hands rested on the wheel, relaxed but precise. His profile was stern, focused. She realized she hadn't felt so protected in a long time. Behind him, in this quiet, powerful car, the bustle and fears of the outside world lost their power. It was a dangerous, yet intoxicating feeling. "You don't have to be afraid to look at me," he said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the road. "And you can say whatever you think. Since you're here, that means you have nothing to fear, at least as long as you're with me." April looked away, embarrassed, but a moment later she looked back at him. She liked his low, even voice. She liked the way he carried himself, without fuss, but with an undeniable inner strength. It had been so long since anyone had taken responsibility for her problems. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to rely on someone. But now she felt her resistance melting away. They drove up to that very restaurant, Golden Dragon. The car hadn't even come to a complete stop when the door swung open, and the very same owner she'd only seen in reviews appeared on the threshold. His face was gray with fear. Minho got out of the car and gestured for April to follow him. She stepped out, feeling her legs buckle, but he walked beside her, his calm contagious. "Miss," the owner began, stuttering and bowing. "I beg your pardon. My deepest apologies. This is a terrible mistake. It will never happen again." He thrust an envelope into her hands. It was thick, too thick to be a simple refund. "That's 10 times the amount of your order," he whispered, his hands shaking. "And please tell Mr. Kim that we'll fix it. We'll close for staff retraining. We'll do everything we can." April looked at this man, who yesterday had seemed an indifferent monster to her, and today trembled before her, or rather, before the one standing behind her. She took the envelope, unsure what to say. Minho's power operated without shouting, without threats. It simply was. And that was enough to change everything. She glanced at Minho. He stood motionless, watching them, his eyes filled with silent satisfaction. At that moment, April realized her interest was no longer limited to the money returned and justice restored. She was intrigued by the man himself, his motives, his strange principles, and the quiet, incredible strength that emanated from him. She quickly lowered her eyes to hide her sudden curiosity. But it was too late. He, in turn, had become so engrossed that he now longed to feel needed again. They drove back in silence. The car was quiet, but now the silence felt comfortable. April looked out the window, but in reality, she was watching Minho. She liked the way he drove, calmly and confidently. She liked the way he sat behind the wheel, the way he held his hands. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The world seemed less hostile next to this silent man. At one of the traffic lights, he accidentally looked up and caught her gaze in the rearview mirror. She wanted to turn away immediately, but couldn't. His gaze was calm and somehow understanding. In that moment, she felt as if he were reading her thoughts, that he knew how lonely and scared she was, that he saw how much she enjoyed this strange ride. She still lowered her eyes, but her heart was beating very fast. "What's wrong with me?" she thought. After all, he's just a stranger, albeit an unusual one. When he pulled the car up to her house, she suddenly felt sad. She didn't want to leave this cozy salon, didn't want to go back to her empty apartment. Here, next to him, she felt protected. But back there, only problems and loneliness awaited her. He went out to open the door for her. As his fingers touched the handle, she felt a strange urge to ask him to stay, just to sit together a little longer. But she knew she couldn't. "Thank you," she said, leaving. "For everything, for the food, for sorting out that restaurant." He nodded. His face was expressionless as always, but she saw something warm in his eyes. Maybe it was just her imagination. "It's all decided," he said in his even voice. "You can sleep peacefully." He didn't wait for her to enter the building. He turned around, got into his car, and drove away. April stood there for a long time, watching the dark sedan until it disappeared around the corner. Mino drove through the night streets in the car and thought about her, about this fragile girl with fire in her eyes, about how she first screamed into the phone and then tried to be strong. He liked her courage. He liked how even when she was scared, she didn't break. He remembered the way she'd looked at him in the mirror. There had been not only fear in her eyes, but also interest, and something else, something that made him feel like more than just a problem solver, but a person. Arriving at the office, he walked into his cubicle. Everything was perfectly clean and orderly, but today, something was off. The air seemed too cold, and the silence too loud. He sat down at the table and tried to work, but his thoughts kept returning to April, to the way she held the envelope of money, not with greedy hands, but carefully, like something fragile. To the way she said thank you, quietly but sincerely. She's afraid of being in debt, he thought. And I haven't met someone for a long time who's afraid of taking rather than giving. He understood it was dangerous. Getting attached to someone meant creating vulnerability. And in his world, vulnerability was expensive. But somehow, he didn't care. April was sitting in her kitchen, staring at the envelope of money. There was a lot of money. A lot. More than she'd seen in months. But somehow, it didn't bring her the same joy as the few minutes she'd spent in the car with this strange man. She recalled his face. Stern but not angry. His hands, strong but gentle. His voice, low and calm, as if he never fussed or was nervous. "Who are you?" she thought. "And why did you appear in my life just when everything was falling apart?" She placed the envelope on the table and sighed. Tomorrow she would have to look for a job. She would have to pay the rent. She would have to return to her ordinary life. But something told her that her life would never be ordinary again. Because somewhere in this big city, there was now a man who one evening brought her hot soup and showed her that even in the darkest day, a ray of light could appear. And even though he left and they said goodbye, April felt it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Morning came to April with the sharp ringing of her alarm. She'd fallen into a short, heavy sleep just a couple of hours earlier, and now her brain refused to wake. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was an empty plastic Tom Yum container on the bedside table. A thick envelope filled with money lay nearby. At first, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to collect her thoughts. And then the memories came flooding back. The layoff, the rain, the cold food and that hair, the hysterical phone call, and him. The man in the perfect coat, his low, calm voice, the drive to the restaurant, the terrified owner, the drive back, filled with silent understanding, and those quick, furtive glances in the mirror. She propped herself up on her elbow and reached for the container, running her finger along the smooth plastic. This wasn't a dream. This had really happened. He has his own life, she said sternly out loud to herself, lowering her feet to the floor. Some other strange life, where people can shut down someone's restaurant in one evening and drive around strange girls in black sedans. You were a problem for him, and problems are solved and forgotten. She stood up, resolutely carried the container to the trash can, and stuffed the envelope into the desk drawer. No need to sigh. I found the money. Good. Now I need to find a job, take care of the house, move on with my life. She tried. She tidied up the apartment, dusted, vacuumed, but her movements were mechanical. Her thoughts stubbornly returned to him, to the way he looked at her, not as a pathetic creature, but as something interesting, to the way his voice sounded when he said, "You don't have to be afraid to look at me." Then she sat down at the computer. She opened job posting websites. She looked through them one after another, but the words blurred into meaningless text. Sales manager, administrator, courier. All this mundane routine now seemed inexpressibly dull and gray after yesterday's outburst of something incredible. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. And again she saw his profile in the light of the streetlights outside the car window. She caught herself trying to remember every detail of his face, his cheekbones, the line of his jaw, the shape of his lips. "No!" she almost screamed, shaking her head vigorously. "Stop it! He's already forgotten you. He's done his job and moved on. You're a closed incident for him." To finally get him out of her head, she decided to take a shower. Under the streams of hot water, she tried to convince herself that it was simply gratitude, mixed with a hint of fear. Nothing more. She was grateful for the help, that's all. She felt better. But when she came out of the bathroom and wrapped herself in a towel, her gaze fell on the smartphone lying on the bed, and her heart gave a strange, painful jolt. What if she tried to find it? She had his number, the same one she'd accidentally called. She could just text "thank you," just like that, just to be polite. She grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking. She scrolled through her call history. That fateful number was there, nameless. She opened a new conversation in the messenger and began dialing. Each key echoed in the silent room, and then she froze. What would she write? "Hi, this is April, the one you took out to restaurants yesterday. How are you?" It sounded ridiculous and desperate. He'd probably think she wanted more money, or that she was clingy. He was a problem solver. And what was she? A former problem now wanting attention? With a cry of despair, she threw the phone on the bed. "No, you can't. It's humiliating." She spent the rest of the day struggling with herself. She cooked, watched a TV series, tried to read. But he was everywhere. In the ticking of the clock, she heard the sound of his engine. In the pattern of the wallpaper, she saw his reflection in the mirror. Meanwhile, in his office on the top floor of the skyscraper, Kim Min-ho was trying to do the same thing. Forget. He had a busy schedule, meetings, negotiations, reports. He gave orders to his subordinates in the same even, dispassionate voice. But today, something was off. During a break between meetings, he walked to the panoramic window and looked out at the city below. His thoughts weren't about logistics or cash flow. He was thinking about the girl with the fiery red hair and eyes filled with a mixture of fear and stubbornness. He remembered how she clutched that envelope, not like a greedy person, but like someone who had received an unexpected and slightly frightening gift. He remembered how she looked at him in the mirror, not with the servility of everyone else, but with genuine, living interest. He ran a hand over his face. It was stupid, dangerous. She was a weak spot, a vulnerability. A connection with such an ordinary, fragile person could cost him dearly in his world. He needed to erase her from his memory, just like another done deal. He returned to his desk and opened his laptop with a flourish, determined to immerse himself in his work. But instead of opening the financial report, his fingers instinctively began typing her name into a search engine. April Jackson. He found her social media profiles. There weren't many. A few photos. She was smiling in them, and it was a different smile altogether. Easy, carefree, something he'd never seen before. He quickly closed the tab, feeling a strange heaviness in his soul. This was wrong. It broke all his rules. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in crimson tones, both of them, each in their own solitude, came to the same conclusion. April sat on her couch in the dark, without turning on the light. She no longer fought it. She simply accepted the fact. She wanted to see him, not out of gratitude, not for money, but because with him, she felt alive, understood, protected. And this hunger was stronger than fear and pride. Minho stayed in the office until late. Everyone else had already left. He sat in his chair, the silence of the office weighing heavily on him. He thought about her last look as he left. It wasn't just gratitude, it was longing. The same longing he felt now. He picked up his personal phone, the very same one. He dialed the number, not hers, but his assistant's. "Find me a reliable excuse," he said without greeting. "A business one, to contact Miss April Jackson, so that it looks natural." He hung up. The attraction proved stronger than reason. Somewhere in the city, a girl he shouldn't have remembered was probably looking at his number on her phone at that very moment, just as he was looking at her online profile. Two universes, accidentally colliding, refused to part. The next day, Elle's assistant arrives early in the morning, and immediately suggests a brilliant solution. Since they still need office staff and April's former field aligns with their needs, they could call her and offer her a job, but keep her in the dark until the last minute. The assistant believed this was the best option. She would earn good money, and her boss would be able to see her whenever he wanted, creating more opportunities for meetings, both casual and business. Kim Min-ho immediately ordered her to act with a smile on his face and promised to reward Elle for his good idea. April spent the morning applying to every job opening imaginable. Desperation was beginning to creep back in. The money in the envelope lay untouched. She swore to herself she would only spend it in the most dire circumstances, and then the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She raised the receiver to her ear, hoping. "Hello, is this April Jackson?" "Yes, I'm listening." "Hello, my name is Sophia, and I'm the HR manager at the Vertical Gallery. We found your resume and were impressed with your experience. We're looking for a special projects coordinator for our new space. We need someone with a fresh perspective, and we think you might be the perfect fit." April couldn't believe her ears. The Vertical Gallery? She'd heard of it. It was a trendy, prestigious place. "Oh, of course," she squeezed out, trying not to show her excitement. "Great," said Sophia. "Can you come by today at 3? Our development director, Mr. Kim, will conduct the interview." April almost dropped her phone. Kim? Her heart sank, then started beating wildly. No, it couldn't be. Coincidence. Kim is a common name, and a development director isn't the kind of person who drives black sedans and closes restaurants. It's just a coincidence. "Yes, I can," she answered quickly, afraid that her voice would betray her confusion. She hung up and froze. Her hands were shaking. This was her dream job. Interesting, creative, in a wonderful place. And it was so perfect, as if fate itself had decided to help her. She couldn't even imagine that this fate was named Kim Min-ho, and that he sat in his office, coldly orchestrating her life like a chess game. The Vertical Gallery turned out to be exactly what she had imagined. Spacious white halls, wooden floors, and contemporary art on the walls that she didn't quite understand, but which she thought was very stylish. She was greeted by Sophia, a smiling woman in a formal suit, and led into a small but elegant meeting room. The interview went smoothly. Sophia asked the standard questions about her work experience, skills, and how she envisioned the role. April answered confidently, sensing that everything was going well. "Thank you, April. That's all I need," Sophia finally said, making a note on her tablet. "The position requires working closely with management. Our development director makes all final decisions on candidates personally. He wants to meet you in person before signing off." April nodded, trying to look calm. That was it. Now she would find out. "Of course I understand. Come on, I'll take you to him." Sophia stood up and walked out into the corridor. April followed her, her heart pounding with every step. They passed through several corridors, past expensive paintings and sculptures. Finally, Sophia stopped at a tall wooden door. "His office," she said, smiled and walked away. April took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and knocked. "Come in," a voice came from behind the door. Low, calm, the very one. She walked in, and the world seemed to turn upside down. The office was enormous, with panoramic windows covering the entire wall, and behind the massive wooden desk sat he, Kim Min-ho. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, not an overcoat, but it was him. His gaze was just as piercing and expressionless. He looked at her, and a barely noticeable shadow of a smile played on his lips. April froze in the doorway, unable to move. Her brain refused to believe it. A dream job, a chance offer. It had all been orchestrated by him. He hadn't just found her, he had created an entire reality for her, one she so readily believed in. "Miss Jackson," he said, his voice like a gentle blow. "Come in. It's good to see you again. Have a seat." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. She walked slowly, as if in a dream, and sat down on it, her eyes never leaving his. "You?" she began, but her voice broke. Is this your gallery?" "One of my projects," he nodded. "I heard the interview went well. Sophia was pleased." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're surprised. Did you think it was just luck?" She could only nod, still unable to speak. "Luck is when a star falls," he said quietly. "And this is the result. The result of me seeing potential in you and deciding to use it." He put her resume on the table. The job is yours if you want it. But now you know who your employer is. Decide. April looked at him, a storm raging in her head. She'd been deceived. She'd been set up. But he'd given her a chance for a better life, and a chance to be with him. And this chance, however unfair, was what she'd been dreaming of all these days. April sat in her chair, feeling as if she were in an electric chair. Her fingers gripped the armrests convulsively. The air in the office grew thick and heavy, as if before a thunderstorm. "You set this whole thing up?" she finally managed to say. "You created a vacancy, just so, to offer you a job?" "Yes." He didn't deny it. His calm was deafening. "But the vacancy is real, and so are your skills. I wouldn't trust such an important task to a non-professional, even if—" He didn't finish, but she understood. "Even if he really wanted to see you." Heat rolled across her cheeks. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me? Because of that call? Because of the complaint about the soup?" Mino slowly rose from the table and walked to the window. His silhouette seemed monolithic against the vast city. "That evening you cried out about injustice," he said, looking at the lights of the metropolis. "But you didn't just complain, you demanded. You fought. There was fire in your voice." He turned to her, and his gaze became intent, analyzing. "In my world, people are either afraid or they obey. They don't burn, you burn, and this fire is interesting." He paused, letting her take his words in. "Besides," a nearly invisible smile touched his lips, "you're the only person in recent years who's dared yell at me and demand I shut down my business. That's memorable." April listened, and her fear gradually began to give way to another feeling, a sharp, nerve-tingling excitement. This man saw her not as a victim, not as a loser, but as something more. Something that intrigued him so much that he'd played an entire chess game just to see her again. "So what now?" she asked, her voice hardening. "Am I supposed to be grateful? Feel special?" "You must be smart," he corrected, returning to the table and sitting down opposite her. He crossed his arms over his chest. "This offer is the best chance you have. Good salary, interesting work, stability, everything you need. And in return," he looked at her intently again. "I get to observe this fire, find out what it's capable of." A tense silence fell between them. April knew he was right. This was the chance she could only dream of, but it was also a trap. Working for this man meant letting him into her life, willingly, giving him some control. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. He shrugged, but a spark of excitement flashed in his eyes, as if he had been expecting this question. "Then you will leave, and we will never see each other again. Your choice, always your choice." He was lying. She could feel it. If she left now, he would find another way, another excuse. The game was already on, and he wasn't one to back down. April closed her eyes for a second, trying to collect her thoughts. Fear told her to run. Her mind reminded her of bills and an empty fridge. And something else, deep inside, whispered how much she missed this feeling. To be noticed, to be desired, to be interesting. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. The very fire he'd spoken of ignited in her own. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "I accept your offer." Minho's expression remained unchanged, but she caught a momentary look of satisfaction in his eyes. He nodded. "A wise decision. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Sophia will brief you on your duties." He became the businesslike, detached boss again. The cat-and-mouse game continued, but now the rules were clear. He was the hunter. She was the prey, who had agreed to participate in the chase. She stood up to leave, but turned around at the threshold. "Mr. Kim?" "Yes?" "That evening, in the car, you said I didn't have to be afraid to look at you. Is that offer still open?" For the first time in their entire encounter, genuine living surprise flashed across his face. It lasted only a split second, but she caught it. "Still in force," he replied. And for the first time, there was a hint of something vaguely resembling warmth in his voice. April walked out of the office, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd just made a deal with the devil. But damn, was that devil charming? And Kim Minho, left alone, stared at the closed door. The corners of his lips slowly curled upward. She was smarter and braver than he'd imagined. The game promised to be far more exciting than he could have imagined. The fire he'd invited into his home could warm her, but it could also burn everything to the ground, and he eagerly awaited what would happen. A new chapter in April's life began with an unfamiliar feeling: anticipation. She arrived at the gallery promptly at 9, where Sophia was already waiting. The day flew by, familiarizing herself with her responsibilities, colleagues, and projects. The work was exactly what she'd dreamed of: creative, dynamic, and meaningful. She caught approving glances and knew she was doing well. Life, it seemed, was finally turning its back on her, but in the back of her mind, he loomed constantly: Kim Min-ho. He passed by her desk several times, nodding at her greeting but never stopping. His presence was as palpable as it had been that evening in the car, but now it was woven into the fabric of her new reality. At lunch, she couldn't help but think about it. He, a man whose time was worth an insane amount of money, had spent resources to create an entire position for her. This wasn't just a rich man's whim. It was a calculated, well-thought-out move, and it clearly led somewhere beyond a simple working relationship. He made the first move, she thought, playing with her fork in her salad. A ridiculous, extravagant move, but a move nonetheless. What am I doing, hiding behind the monitor and pretending this is all just a lucky coincidence? The thought of talking to him, frankly, was terrifying, but the fear of losing what had barely begun was stronger. She didn't want to be just an employee. She felt a thread between them, thin and strong, and she was afraid that if she didn't pull it now, it would break. At the end of the day, when most of the staff had already left, she plucked up her courage. His office was at the far end of the corridor. Her heart was pounding, but she kept walking. The door was ajar. She rapped her knuckles, hearing her own voice tremble. "Mr. Kim, can I speak for a moment?" He sat at the table, studying some documents. He was wearing no jacket, and his tie was loosened. He looked less unapproachable, but no less imposing. "Come in, April," he said, putting the folder aside. "What's wrong? Having trouble adjusting?" "No, everything's fine," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Feeling the click of the lock cut them off from the outside world. I wanted to say something." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the table. His gaze became attentive, scrutinizing. He realized this was not a business visit. "I'm listening." She approached his desk, but didn't sit. She needed to stand to feel more confident. "I've been thinking all day," she began, looking him straight in the eye, trying to keep her voice steady. "About why I'm here. You created this job for me. You spent time, effort, and I'm endlessly grateful for this chance. But," she paused, collecting her thoughts, "we both understand that it wasn't just my marketing skills that caused this." He didn't interrupt, didn't look away. He simply listened, absorbing her every word. "That evening, in the car, and now, there's something between us, some kind of attraction. I don't know what to call it, but I feel it, and I think, I'm almost sure you do too." Her words hung in the quiet office. She waited for him to deny it, bring the conversation back to business, and laugh at her, but he didn't. Instead, he slowly rose from the table. He came so close to her that she could smell his warmth and the light, tart scent of his perfume. "You're not mistaken," he said quietly. His voice had lost its businesslike coldness, and a hoarse, intimate note had entered it. "I'm truly impressed by your professional qualities, but that's not the main reason." He looked at her with such intensity that it took her breath away. "When you screamed into the phone, there was more than just anger in your voice. There was life in it, the kind I haven't seen around me in a long time. You were real, dirty, angry, desperate, but real. In my world, everyone wears masks, and you broke down the door to my private room and burst in without a mask." He took a step closer. "I couldn't forget that. I couldn't forget you. And yes, I created this work because I wanted to see if you could burn as brightly in normal life. And you can. I watched you today." April listened, her heart pounding. His words were a direct confirmation of everything she'd hoped for but been afraid to imagine. "So what now?" she whispered. "What does it mean?" He gently, almost weightlessly, ran his finger across her cheek. The touch was electrifying. "It means, April, that I'm glad you brought it up." His lips twitched into a smile, genuine this time, without a hint of mockery. "Because according to the rules of my world, I can't take the next step without risking a lot. But you've already broken all my rules from the very beginning. He looked into her eyes, and in his gaze she saw not only desire, but also respect, and that very vulnerability that he so carefully hid from everyone. So yes, he continued it, his voice even quieter, I have personal reasons, very personal ones, and if you're ready, we can try to figure out what this is together. He didn't kiss her. He didn't hug her. He simply stood there, giving her space and time, offering her a choice, just like that time outside her apartment. But this time, the stakes were immeasurably higher. April looked at this strong, dangerous, incredible man who had just revealed a part of his soul to her, and she knew it was too late to run. And she didn't want to anyway. Instead of answering, she put her hand on his. It was a small movement, but it meant everything. It was her yes. And in the silence of his office, in the rays of the setting sun, two lonelinesses finally found each other. The morning began not with the ringing of an alarm clock, but with a delicate aroma that woke April even before she opened her eyes. Next to her bed, on the nightstand where her usual cup of tea had rested the night before, stood a huge, exquisite bouquet. Not roses, but something more refined. White orchids, waxy and perfect, framed by delicate greenery. They emanated a subtle, intoxicating scent. She sat up in bed, still unable to believe her eyes. A small, thick card lay among the flowers. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. April, you have the day off today, officially. I want to spend this day together. Relax, get to know each other beyond these walls, and discuss our future. Think of this as an invitation to a date. Everything you need will be delivered to you soon. Be ready by 12 Ashik. I'll pick you up. M. She reread the message 3 times. Every word imprinted itself on her mind, evoking a new wave of dizzying joy. Date. Our future. He hadn't simply arranged a meeting with her. He had announced a day off, taken the initiative, planned everything down to the last detail, and that commanding tone, be prepared, which in anyone else would have seemed arrogant, from him sounded like a promise. A promise that she would be taken care of, that everything would be perfect. She jumped out of bed, her heart racing. The small, familiar apartment was suddenly filled with sunlight and a kind of magic. She ran to the bouquet and touched the orchid petals. They were cool and velvety, real. Suddenly, her body began to move in time with the music playing in her head, some old, joyful tune. She spun around in the middle of the room, arms outstretched, letting a feeling of complete, utter happiness wash over her. She laughed loudly and sincerely, and the sound was so unfamiliar within these walls. He wants to spend this day with me, the whole day, get to know each other. Her thoughts raced. She imagined his face, his calm smile, his hands. She wondered where he would take her, to some secret restaurant, out of town, maybe just for a long walk. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it would be with him. Then fragments of their conversation in the office yesterday flashed through her mind. His words, "We can try to figure out what this is together." And now he was turning those words into action. He didn't procrastinate. He didn't gamble. He acted with his signature determination. A sudden ringing of the intercom made her jump. She answered. Yes? A delivery for Miss Jackson, came a polite male voice. A few minutes later, 2 unperturbed men stood at her door, carrying several large boxes and hangers of clothes in protective covers. They carried everything into the living room, nodded politely, and left. April's heart skipped a beat as she unpacked the essentials. It felt like Christmas. The first box held a dress, not flashy, but impeccably crafted from soft, flowing navy cashmere. It was simple, yet incredibly luxurious. The second contained a pair of elegant heels that perfectly matched her foot size. The third contained a fine wool coat, gloves, and a silk scarf with a subtle, barely noticeable pattern. Everything was in the same color scheme. Everything coordinated perfectly. He hadn't just sent her clothes. He had sent her a look, his look for her. She tried everything on in front of the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored for her. It accentuated every curve of her body, yet looked modest and sophisticated. She looked at her reflection and didn't recognize herself. This wasn't the April who'd been fired yesterday. This was the woman about to meet the man of her dreams. The rest of the afternoon flew by in a pleasant bustle. A long shower, careful makeup, hairstyling. She caught herself humming and smiling at her reflection. For the first time in years, she felt not just like a creature surviving in the big city, but like the heroine of her own incredibly beautiful story. She thought about him, about how, from a withdrawn, cold man, he began to transform for her into someone real, vulnerable, determined. She thought about his power, which frightened and attracted her at the same time, about his words. "You broke down the door to my private room and burst in without any mask." He saw the real her, and it seemed he preferred it that way. As the clock approached 12, her heart began to beat in unison with the second hand. She walked to the window. Precisely at noon, the same dark sedan pulled up to her front door, silent as a ghost. The car door opened, and he stepped out. Kim Minho. He wasn't wearing a work coat, but an elegant dark gray overcoat draped over his shoulders. His gaze found her immediately, and silent approval flashed in his eyes as he looked her over from head to toe. "Perfect," he said simply, offering her his hand. His touch, even through the fabric of his gloves, was as electrifying as yesterday. She stepped outside with him, and the winter air felt intoxicating. "Where are we going?" she asked as he sat her down in the car. "To surprise you," he replied, a slight, almost mischievous note creeping into his voice. "That's a man's job on a first date." He pulled away, and April, leaning back against the soft leather seat, watched him. She thought about how her life, which yesterday had seemed like a dead end, had now become an exciting journey with a completely unknown destination. And she had finally stopped being afraid of it. She was ready for whatever fate and this mysterious man behind the wheel had in store for her. The car smoothly turned off the highway onto a narrow, almost invisible dirt road, winding between centuries-old pine trees. The snow lying along the sides sparkled in the winter sun like scattered diamonds. The air, clean and crisp, penetrated the cabin, mingling with the scent of leather and his perfume. April pressed her face to the window, watching in fascination as the dense forest gave way to snow-covered meadows. Finally, they stopped at a small platform, hidden from view by a ring of tall trees. Directly in front of them, on the shore of a frozen lake, stood a modern glass pavilion, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. It consisted almost entirely of panoramic windows, reflecting the snowy expanse and forest. "Let's go," Minho said, walking around the car to open the door for her. His hand, offered for support, was firm and reliable. She stepped out and was enveloped in absolute deafening silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of branches under the weight of snow and the distant cawing of a crow. The air was so pure it stung her nostrils. He led her inside. The pavilion turned out to be a single, spacious room with a high ceiling. In the center stood a sofa and several armchairs in front of a fireplace, where logs were already crackling. A teapot steamed on a low table, and a basket of pastries sat. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was the view. Glass walls blurred the boundaries between the interior and the snowy forest, creating a feeling of complete oneness with nature. They took off their outerwear and stood by the glass, looking at the frozen lake, on which the wind was drawing bizarre snow patterns. And then something strange happened. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but rich, full of understanding. He stood behind her, not touching her, but she felt his presence with every cell of her skin. She saw their reflection in the glass, hers in an elegant blue dress, his in dark trousers and a simple turtleneck. They looked like part of this landscape, like part of each other. He slowly, giving her time to pull away, placed his hands on her shoulders. His touch was warm and heavy, like a seal. She closed her eyes, immersing herself in the feeling. Safety, peace, belonging. They stood like that for what seemed like an eternity, listening to the silence, listening to the beating of their hearts, which it seemed to her beat in unison. Then he gently turned her toward him. His eyes were dark and bottomless, like the surface of a lake behind glass. There was no usual restraint in them. They held pure, unguarded revelation. He didn't kiss her. Instead, he pressed her palm to his chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast and strong, just like hers. And this gesture was enough. Everything was said. They moved to the fireplace. He poured her tea into a porcelain cup. They sat on the soft carpet in front of the fire, and silence enveloped them again. But this time April felt the need to break it, not because she was embarrassed, but because the overwhelming emotions inside her were seeking release. She put down her cup and looked at him. The firelight played in his black eyes, casting golden reflections. Her voice was quiet but clear in the silence of the pavilion. I've never felt like this in my life, like I've stepped into a fairy tale. Not because of this place, she gestured widely, though it is certainly magical, but because of everything. Because of what's happening between us. Because of you. She looked at him, knowing she was taking a risk by baring her soul, but no longer afraid. My life has always been nothing but a struggle, survival, trying to stay afloat. I forgot that it could be any other way, that you could just breathe and be happy and feel protected, significant. You gave me all of that, and I still can't believe it. He listened motionless. His face was serious. For any other man, such words might have been a simple compliment, but for him, raised in a world where emotion was a weakness and trust a luxury, this confession was something much more. It was a key she was willingly handing over to him, an act of absolute trust. He exhaled slowly, and his shoulders, always so tense, sagged slightly. I've never done anything like this, he began, his voice low and slightly hoarse. Not for anyone. To create a fairy tale. He said the word with a slight, almost weightless smile, as if tasting it. My life is calculation, control, pragmatism, feelings were an unwanted complication. He looked at the fire, deftly finding the right words in it. But with you, he turned his gaze to her, and that very fire he'd spoken of burned in his eyes. Everything is different. You're the first one I've ever wanted to do this for. I want to break my own rules. I want to see your eyes glow like they do now. I want to create this different world for you. Because when you're in it, he paused. Oh, my world becomes different. It becomes brighter. He reached out and ran the back of his fingers across her cheek. It was an incredibly gentle, almost timid touch. You came into my life like a hurricane, April. Uninvited, unexpected, and completely necessary. And everything I do because I can't do otherwise, because I want this fairy tale too, with you. There was no pathos or frivolity in his words. Each one was weighed and verified. It was a confession as powerful as her own. April felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of cleansing, happiness, and complete, utter understanding. She didn't try to brush them away. He looked at her tears, and there was no panic or embarrassment in his eyes. There was only deep, silent respect. He leaned down and very slowly, giving her every moment to retreat, brought his lips to hers. It wasn't a passionate, captivating kiss. It was a promise, a slow, solemn, incredibly tender touch that sealed all the words spoken and unspoken. When they finally parted their lips, the world around them remained unchanged. The forest remained a forest, the lake a lake. But for the two of them, everything was different. The boundaries between her and his worlds were completely erased. They were no longer a mafia boss and an unemployed girl. They were simply a man and a woman who had found each other in a chaotic world. And their fairy tale was just beginning. That day was like a fairy tale. But when Minho brought April home, the car went silent. They both understood that behind the beautiful dates lay the truth. Their lives were too different. April gathered her courage and said what she'd been thinking all this time. Your world scares me. I don't know if I can live in such fear forever, but I want to be with you. She suggested finding a solution. He should gradually step away from the most dangerous tasks. She should learn to trust him and accept the remaining risks. Minho listened silently. She saw the struggle in his eyes, his need to control everything warring with his desire to be with her. Finally, he said quietly, You're right. We can't live in two worlds at once. He took her hand in his. It wasn't just a touch, it was a promise to change for the sake of their future. When April got out of the car, she felt different. Yes, the difficulties remained, but now they were shared. They had found a way to be together, and that was what mattered. As she fell asleep that evening, for the first time in a long time, she thought not about their problems, but about the shared road ahead, a journey they would walk together. The next morning began not with anxiety, but with an unusual feeling of quiet, deep joy. April woke up and lay for a few minutes, listening to the birds singing outside the window and her own even breathing. For the first time in years, she wasn't awakened by a heavy burden or driven from her bed by anxious thoughts of unpaid bills and a hopeless future. Her gaze fell on the empty table where the container with that ill-fated soup had stood yesterday. Now, an elegant bottle of perfume lay there, one of the few gifts he'd managed to give her. And instead of the bitterness of that day, a smile lit up her face. She imagined herself that way, broken and angry, soaking wet in the rain. What if someone had come up to her and said, "Soon, someone extraordinary will come into your life. You'll wake up smiling, you'll have your dream job, and you'll know what true love is?" She probably would have laughed in his face through her tears, or simply ignored him, thinking he was crazy. Fate had played a cruel joke on her, which turned out to be the greatest gift. The dismissal, the despair, that stupid hair in the soup, all of it wasn't a chain of misfortunes, but a strange winding path leading straight to him, to Kim Min-ho. She got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the waking city. The thought that her mistaken call hadn't been an accident, but some incredible coincidence, a destiny, made her heart beat faster. It was as if the universe itself, seeing her drowning, had handed her a lifeline in the form of a phone with one misdialed number. She was certain he was destined for her. He was as lonely in his cold, orderly world as she was in hers. They were two halves who had found each other in the most absurd and beautiful way. She was so eager to share this story with someone, she cried. She could post it on social media with the hashtag #HowIMetLove, or gather her friends over a glass of wine and enthusiastically recount how it all began. She could laugh at the absurdity of the situation, see their envy and surprise. But she had no friends. Work and the struggle to survive left no time for friendship. She had only had superficial relationships with her colleagues at previous jobs. And now, at the happiest moment of her life, she had no one to share that joy with. She was left alone with her happiness. Alone with a story that resembled a fairy tale, but was, at the same time, the pure truth. But this loneliness wasn't oppressive, but radiant. Because now she had him, her first true love, the man who became everything to her, her lover, her best friend, and the support she so desperately needed. She picked up the phone and looked at his number. It was the same one. She no longer deleted it from her history. He was her most treasured contact. She didn't call him. She just sent a short message. "Thank you for yesterday and for everything." The answer came almost immediately. "This is just the beginning." April smiled, clutching the phone to her chest. Yes, this was only the beginning of their shared story. A story that began with a mistake, with a shout into the phone, with a hair in the soup, and it was the most beautiful story she could have imagined. She was alone, but no longer lonely. And that was the greatest miracle that rainy day had given her. Kim Min-ho sat in his office that morning. Important documents lay before him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was remembering that chance call a few weeks ago. Back then, the call from a strange girl had angered him. Someone had dared to disturb his peace over some food. But now he realized it was the best call of his life. If someone had told him back then that this girl would become the most important person in his life, he wouldn't have believed it. His world was one of money, power, and calculation. There was no room for chance, but this chance occurrence changed everything. April, with her character, her directness, and sincerity, showed him a different life. One where there was not only business and enemies, but also simple joys. He looked at his phone. Before, it had been just a tool for work. Now it was a connection to her, to something that had become more important than any deal. Min-ho picked up a notebook and started writing a plan. Not a business plan, but a list of changes to make in his life. Get away from dangerous activities, find legal options, make my life more peaceful. He'd never believed in fate, but now he was beginning to think that that mistaken call hadn't been just a coincidence. Too much had changed for the better. Before, he'd been respected and feared. With April, he felt something new, a desire to be better. Not richer or stronger, but simply better. He put the papers aside. Today, he would start with the simplest thing, cancel a few risky meetings. A small step toward a life where April could feel safe. Kim Min-ho, who had always relied solely on calculation, was grateful for chance for the first time.